Year after year, the very systems meant to shield women across the United Kingdom are precisely what let them down. It's a silent collapse inside courtrooms, police stations, and hospitals where uncomfortable questions are never raised. And sometimes that failure is fatally absolute. They are murdered by the very person who should have cherished them most. Sarah Henshaw was just 31 when she was brutally killed. She was a loving mother to 2 girls, a cherished daughter to her own mother, Lorraine, and a wonderful friend to those fortunate enough to be in her orbit. Friends recall an outgoing, fun-loving person whose laughter was utterly contagious. For years, she struggled to get away from a man intent on controlling her, and at long last, she had summoned the courage to end things for good. That very resolve, tragically, may have been what ultimately cost her her life. This is Sarah's story. It's more than just the story of her murder, though. We will recount that in full, because it demands to be told. It is the story of warning signs that were present for more than a decade, and the investigation that was launched in its wake. It is also about the justice that was ultimately served in her memory. If anything you hear in this case strikes a familiar chord in your life or someone else's, please reach out for help. This tragic cycle does not have to happen again. Are you prepared for the most disturbing stories from Great Britain? We are introducing our new book, Unreal True Crime, British Edition. 35 stunning true crime cases that will have you gripped from the very first page. It's available on Amazon in paperback and Kindle formats, or you can get an instant PDF download from our website. You'll find all the links in the description below, so be sure to secure your copy today. And now let's return to the case at hand as it was in 2012 that Sarah first brought Darren Hall to meet her mother, Lorraine. Sarah was already raising a little girl by herself and held that fragile hope that this time things might finally turn out differently. Lorraine, however, was much harder to convince. She picked up on things right from the very beginning, like the way Darren constantly interrupted Sarah. She noticed how he made her choices for her and his overwhelming need to track her location and her companions at all times. This is the exact pattern of coercive control in its initial phase. It hardly ever starts with a big dramatic event. It accumulates gradually, eroding a person's will like water on rock, until the victim has been so completely conditioned to it that their own reality becomes blurred. In England and Wales, coercive control officially became a criminal offense. Under the Serious Crime Act of 2015, it was a long overdue acknowledgement of something survivors and experts had known for decades. The most lethal abusers are frequently not the ones who are the most physically violent, but rather the ones who manipulate and dominate every aspect of their victim's life. By 2016, Sarah was expecting their daughter, her second child. Any pretense Darren might have maintained in the early days had completely vanished by then. The controlling behavior had now escalated into physical violence at one point. During her pregnancy, Darren actually shoved her in the stomach. She was rushed to the hospital to check on her unborn child. The baby was fortunately unharmed, but the assault itself was a glaring revelation of the kind of man he truly was. Sarah didn't walk out right at that moment. This isn't a point of judgment, but a critical reality we must face to prevent more deaths like hers. To walk away from an abusive relationship while pregnant with one child at home and another on the way from a partner who has methodically isolated you, that is not a simple choice to make. It is one of the most perilous moments a person can ever face, and failing to leave is never the victim's fault. It's a direct outcome of a situation specifically manufactured by the person causing the harm. What's also significant here is what didn't occur over those years. There was no official intervention of any kind. There were no legal repercussions for the attack that happened during her pregnancy. There was no system in place that compelled Darren to face the consequences of the violence he had already inflicted. Perpetrators who suffer no penalties for their actions don't learn that their conduct is unacceptable. They learn that it is allowed, and around 2018, Sarah summoned the strength to finish the relationship. She left him, moved back into her home in Ilkeston, Derbyshire, and started the hard job of rebuilding her life as a single parent to 2 daughters. Yet one single crucial element was never addressed. Darren Hall was still in possession of a key to her front door. He never returned that key, the locks remained unchanged, and that small object was far more than just a piece of metal. In the context of their history, it was a clear message. It was a statement that the end of their relationship was not permanent, at least not to him. It was a tool that granted him continuous access, a physical symbol of the power imbalance that Sarah had desperately tried to dismantle by walking away. In the years that passed, some level of communication between them inevitably continued. This was partly unavoidable since they had a child together. Trying to raise a child with an abusive ex-partner is one of the hardest things a person can do. It hands the abuser a perfectly valid reason to stay connected to their victim's world long after the romance itself is officially over. Then in April of 2022, Sarah's grandfather passed away at the age of 71. Grief often has a way of making things crystal clear. Following that devastating loss, Sarah made a resolute and final choice to remove Darren from her world once and for all. She was drawing a hard line in the sand. For the average person, hearing that a relationship is finished for good is a painful reality, but one they eventually learn to accept. But for a man like Darren Hall, whose entire sense of self was constructed around his power over one woman, that boundary was perceived very differently. It was a direct threat, a provocation, and an unacceptable challenge to his authority. All the research into intimate partner murder is consistent and completely clear on this point. The time frame immediately after a victim makes the final decision to leave is, statistically speaking, the most lethal point in any abusive relationship. Darren Hall was not the type of person to gracefully accept a loss of power June 20th. 2023 was a Tuesday. Sarah had spent the afternoon with a friend, a perfectly normal day in Ilkeston. She was last spotted on security footage at approximately 9 p.m. near her residence on Norman Street. That video footage would become the final public image ever captured of her alive. She went back to her house that night. Sometime before 10 o'clock, the front door to her home was unlocked, not by Sarah, but by Darren Hall, who let himself in with a key that for Cuba he had never given back. He had been told to get out, but Darren refused to listen to Sarah's demand. He planted himself down and simply stayed for dinner, a meal that ended in a bitter argument. An oppressive tension filled the home, a suffocating feeling, instantly familiar to anyone who's ever endured a toxic relationship. Somehow keeping her composure, Sarah drove her friend all the way home. She then returned to her house where he was still waiting for her all alone. At 10:02 p.m., Sarah was messaging with her closest friend, sending her very last text at 10:09 p.m. That was the final communication she would ever have with a person who cared for her. At 10:37 p.m., her best friend sent a follow-up asking if she was okay, but a response never arrived. Her best friend was about to spend the rest of that night and the coming days with a horrible mounting certainty that something was dreadfully wrong. It was the kind of feeling that begins as a faint unease and slowly escalates second by second into the stark realization that an unchangeable event has occurred. And she was absolutely right, but by the time her gut feeling solidified enough for her to act, Darren Hall had already bought himself several hours to get to work. Hours he used to sanitize, to discard evidence, to drive, to come back, and to pretend like absolutely nothing was amiss. A neighbor nearby heard noises that evening that she would never be able to forget from the bedroom. There came a single loud thud, followed by an immediate and total silence. It was a quiet that felt deeply unsettling, not peaceful at all. She texted Sarah to check in and got a message back saying the dog had a seizure. The explanation seemed just believable enough to prevent any immediate panic. What that neighbor couldn't possibly know was that Sarah hadn't sent that text at all. Darren Hall was using her phone to control the story, to give himself more time. In the pre-dawn hours of June 21st, the same neighbor was awake once more. Looking out her window, she saw Darren standing by his van with the back doors wide open. He then shut the doors, climbed into the driver's seat, and vanished into the night. She didn't realize it then, but she had just witnessed the last phase of Darren Hall's plan to make Sarah vanish forever. This wasn't a man reeling in shock, frozen by his own terrible actions. He was systematic, he was efficient, he was eliminating a problem. In the following days, Hall began telling everyone that Sarah had just up and left. He even told her neighbor he had no idea where she'd gone, claiming she'd taken off early that morning, but he had no good answer for why her car was still sitting right outside. He later asserted that some of her personal items were gone, a move to bolster the lie that she had left on her own terms. It's amazing what our phones know about our every move. Every Wi-Fi network, every GPS pin, every single step logged by a fitness tracker creates a digital footprint. And that very footprint would be the complete undoing of Darren Hall's attempt to evade the law. At 1:50 a.m. on June 21st, Darren's phone pinged Sarah's home Wi-Fi before connecting to the GPS in his van. The data tracked his path northward on the M1, showing him getting off at Junction 29 and then pulling over in a lay-by on the A617 toward Chesterfield. It was a secluded, out-of-the-way stretch of road, the sort of place you'd only visit at 2 in the morning if you had a very specific dark purpose. The data recovered from his time in that lay-by was even more damning. For about 9 minutes, his phone's flashlight was turned on and off repeatedly. His health application registered 266 steps, a remarkably high number for that time of night, especially given his usual pattern of complete inactivity between midnight and 6 a.m. Somebody was busy in the darkness, moving with intent, performing a task that needed both illumination and physical exertion, and the digital trickery didn't stop there. That calming text message sent from Sarah's phone to her worried neighbor about the dog's seizure was not a message typed in a moment of distress. It meant Darren had to unlock her phone craft, a message that sounded like her, and send it with the cold intention of stalling any alarm bells. This wasn't the behavior of a man consumed by remorse. It was the very same manipulative mind that had dominated Sarah for their entire relationship, now focused squarely on the problem of his own survival. This detail is important for more than just its legal weight. It speaks volumes about the kind of man Darren Hall truly was and always had been. Even in the moments right after taking the life of his child's mother, his primary impulse wasn't sorrow, regret, or even shock. It was pure, unadulterated control. It wasn't until June 23rd, a full 3 days after the last time Sarah was seen alive, that police were finally called over concerns for her safety. Her vehicle remained parked on Norman Street, and her phone had been turned off, which for anyone who knew Sarah was an immediate cause for major concern. Sarah was a deeply dedicated mother. She would never just disappear and abandon her daughters, so officers forced their way into the home and found exactly what they feared. The scene inside the flat was profoundly disturbing. A bucket, a mop, and a bottle of bleach pointed to a frantic and purposeful cleanup effort. They also found a broken necklace with a little elephant charm that belonged to her, collecting 23 separate items in total. Phones, a laptop. Various articles of clothing and a large blue tarpaulin were taken, while Sarah's dressing gown and slippers were later discovered dumped in a nearby bin. These were small personal belongings that each told a part of their own silent, tragic story. Hall was taken into custody on suspicion of murder on June 23rd, while phone records led police directly to that A617 lay-by near the M1's junction 29. A team of specialist searchers was sent to scour the underbrush just past midnight on June 26th, and there they discovered the remains of Sarah Henshaw. Her body was severely decomposed with pieces of blue tarp scattered nearby that perfectly matched the one they had found in her home. The same tarp, the same person, the same calculated evil. At first, Hall denied any involvement whatsoever, maintaining the cool composure of someone who thought he had covered his tracks well enough to get away with it, but his story started to crumble as the evidence mounted. He presented a completely new version of events. Sarah had accidentally fallen down the stairs. It was a terrible accident. He claimed he had completely panicked, and that his terror led him to make one terrible choice after another, like moving her body to that isolated spot, and disposing of her things and sending texts from her phone to her concerned friends and scrubbing the entire scene clean with bleach. He went back to his life as if nothing had happened while her family was living a nightmare, an account of events that simply does not hold together. While panic is a genuine human response, Hall's actions showed no sign of it. They were calculated and methodical. He drove to a pre-selected isolated spot, had a tarpaulin ready, and even used his phone's flashlight to see in the pitch black. Every action was the result of a choice. Each choice demanded he push aside any panic and rely on cold calculation. Taken together, these actions don't paint the picture of a terrified man at a loss. They reveal a methodical killer who knew exactly what he was doing. The evolution of his story tells you everything you need to know about the man Darren Hall truly was. It began with a straightforward denial, the typical defense of someone who thinks they've perfectly concealed their crime. But once the evidence made that lie impossible to maintain, his story shifted to the tragic accident narrative, a defense adapted on the fly. Neither of these responses reflects how a person would act when genuinely mourning a loved one. Both are the desperate moves of someone just trying to win. The trial of Darren Hall began on December 4th, 2023 at Derby Crown Court and lasted for roughly 2 weeks. The prosecution team was up against a significant hurdle because Sarah's body was found in an advanced stage of decay. A precise cause of death was impossible for pathologists to determine. There were no telltale forensic injuries that could have proven the charge beyond any doubt. Court testimony, however, did highlight evidence of bruising on her neck, which matched the size of a dressing gown cord, a detail the prosecution carefully presented to the jury as a piece of the puzzle. Ultimately, the case wasn't built on pathology alone. It was built on the weight of all the evidence combined. This included phone data that put Hall at both the crime scene and the body disposal site, plus the forensic link between two separate pieces of tarpaulin. There was the neighbor who heard a loud thud and then saw Hall loading up his van, and there were the text messages he sent from Sarah's phone long after she was dead. The cleaning supplies, the broken necklace, and the long documented history of abuse provided the context for everything else. While any single piece of evidence could potentially be argued away, their collective power was undeniable, leading the jury to return a guilty verdict for murder. Darren Hall, a carpet fitter and former partner, was now a convicted murderer. He received a life sentence and must serve a minimum of 17 years before he can even be considered for parole. He's now an inmate at HMP Nottingham. For Sarah's family, the verdict represented justice incomplete and profoundly unsatisfying in every way that counts, but justice all the same as the community came together to support them. More than £9,000 was raised for her funeral and to help her 2 daughters, 2 little girls now forced to grow up without a mother who have a right to know. Her death mattered, and the man who took her is locked away. To truly grasp the Sarah Henshaw case, you have to look past the event itself and into the psychological framework that built it. This wasn't some random, unpredictable outburst. It was the final terrible act in a decade-long pattern that any domestic abuse expert would instantly recognize as one of the most lethal profiles in intimate partner violence. Darren Hall's conduct throughout their entire relationship aligns perfectly with what psychologists call coercive controlling violence. This is completely different from a spontaneous argument that gets out of hand on both sides. Coercive control is defined by its one-sided nature. One person systematically isolates monitors and subjugates the other, with the driving force not being rage, but a need for power. The objective is not to win a fight, but to completely own another human being. From Lorraine's very first concerns back in 2012, to the physical assault while Sarah was pregnant in 2016, to him keeping a house key after they split, the pattern never broke. Darren Hall genuinely believed he possessed rights over Sarah Henshaw that she had no power to take away. His refusal to return the key after their relationship was over holds a deep psychological meaning that goes far beyond its practical use. In the mindset of an abuser, a breakup can trigger what experts term an identity threat. The abuser's entire sense of self, which is built on controlling their victim, begins to crumble the moment that victim walks away. That key became a psychological totem, a tangible item that let Hall sustain the delusion in his mind that he still had legitimate access to Sarah. It was a way to believe she hadn't really left him, that on some fundamental level she was still his property. Sarah's increasing determination, especially after her grandfather passed away in 2022, corresponds exactly to what specialists term separation assault. Studies have shown time and again that the danger of deadly violence skyrockets precisely when a victim makes a final, definitive move to leave. The more clearly a victim signals that the relationship is completely finished, the more the abuser feels their control slipping away. For Darren Hall, Sarah's choice to completely cut ties wasn't just a rejection. It was an existential threat, and his answer to that threat was murder. The behavior that came after the killing, the systematic disposal of her body, and the fabricated text messages were just part of it. The bleached crime scene and the concocted disappearance story are what forensic psychologists identify as instrumental post-offense behavior. These are not the choices made by someone overcome with remorse or sorrow. They are the choices of a man whose primary cognitive function immediately after killing was his own survival. The abuser and the murderer were never two separate entities. They were one and the same. This case also begs a systemic question for which there is no easy answer if the warning signs were there for more than a decade. And they absolutely were. Why wasn't Sarah better protected? The most insidious crimes are the ones you can't see, which makes coercive control nearly impossible to prosecute. It leaves no clean forensic trace. It demands that survivors untangle a history of abuse that they were systematically conditioned to accept as completely normal. The tragedy of Sarah Henshaw is so much more than a narrative about a single man's brutality. It is a desperate plea that we must do better for her daughters, and for every woman trapped in the same kind of nightmare that ultimately took her life. Before we finish, let us recount the entire story one last time from the very beginning to its tragic end. In 2012, Sarah brought Darren Hall home to meet her mother, Lorraine. His controlling nature was apparent from the very start, and by 2016, Sarah was expecting their daughter. Hall's abuse became violent during her pregnancy when he pushed her in the stomach, sending her to the hospital. The relationship was now unmistakably abusive. Around 2018, Sarah and Hall finally separated, and she began to start over as a single mother to her two girls. Hall, however, held onto a key to her home, and the locks were never changed. In April of 2022, Sarah's grandfather passed away at 71, and this event solidified her decision to cut Hall out of her life for good. On Tuesday, June 20th, 2023, Sarah was with a friend and last seen on security footage at about 9 p.m. near her house. Hall let himself inside using the key he had kept. Sarah told him to get out, but he would not go. She drove her friend home and then came back all by herself, sending her final text at 9 p.m. When her best friend texted back at 10:37 p.m., there was no response. That was the night of June 20th to the 21st, 2023. A neighbor heard a loud thud from Sarah's house, which was followed by an eerie quiet. She messaged Sarah and got a reply from Hall using Sarah's phone to lie that the dog had a seizure. In the dead of night at 1:50 a.m., Hall's phone connected to Sarah's Wi-Fi, and his van's GPS phone data recorded the flashlight being used again and again, and 266 steps in a pull-off area on the A617 near M1 Junction 29. From the 21st to the 23rd of June, 2023, Hall told everyone that Sarah had just up and left. He went back to her house and threw away her dressing gown and slippers, which were later found in a dumpster close by. On June 23, 2023, concerned friends contacted the authorities' officers, forced entry, and discovered cleaning supplies, a broken elephant charm necklace, a blue tarp, and 23 other seized items. Hall was taken into custody on suspicion of murder shortly after midnight on June 26, 2023. What was believed to be Sarah's body was discovered in a wooded area off the A617 near M1 Junction 29. The story of Sarah Henshaw is more than a tragic case. It is a powerful reminder of how control manipulation and silent suffering can hide behind ordinary relationships. Abuse does not always begin with violence. Often it starts with small signs, jealousy, disguised as love isolation, disguised as protection and control, disguised as care. Over time, these behaviors can slowly take away a person's independence, confidence, and safety. Sarah's story teaches us that coercive control is real and dangerous. When someone constantly monitors, intimidates, or emotionally manipulates their partner, it is not love, it is abuse. Recognizing these warning signs early can save lives. Friends, Family members and communities must also learn to listen carefully and take concerns seriously, because victims often feel trapped and unheard. This tragedy also reminds society that support systems matter. When institutions, authorities, and communities respond quickly and compassionately, they can help protect those who feel powerless. Most importantly, Sarah's story encourages us to speak up. If something feels wrong in a relationship, it deserves attention and support. No one should have to live in fear in their own home. By remembering Sarah, we honor her not only with sympathy, but with awareness and the determination to protect others before it is too late.